I call this meeting of the Board of Education at 6:30. We stand for the pledge of allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call the roll, Madam President, Secretary.
Yes. Daniel Winston, absent. Anthony Johnson.
Present.
Lori Hicks.
Present.
Misha Early.
Present.
Cheryl Flesher.
Present.
Amanda Flesher. Present. Shirley Talbert.
Present. Next item on the agenda is approval of agenda. Are there any corrections to the agenda? There are none. The agenda will be as written. Next item on the agenda is superintendent communication.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to recognize our hospitality and tourism program, comprised of a number of students from Thurston High School, as well as our very own Chef Tony. On November 15th, Chef Tony and our culinary and hospitality students assisted Gleaners, and with a tremendous effort of moving over 7,400 pounds of food that our students packed to assist Gleaners with preparing for meals for families in need throughout southeastern Michigan. And so we're grateful for the partnership that we have with Gleaners, and Mr. Kinsey was instrumental in that for a number of years over at Jefferson, and to see the work continued from our Thurston High School students as well as Chef Tony. Some of the pictures from that day of the students doing those volunteer efforts were pretty joyful. So I'd like to highlight their outstanding work, especially at this time of year. So that concludes my communications.
Very good. Next item on the agenda is board communications. Are there any?
I do have one.
Yes.
It's good to be back, number one. Number two, I don't know if there's anybody here from the SREA, but I did really appreciate the Get Well card from them. So if you would pass that on.
Absolutely.
Very good. Are there any more? Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Do I have a board member willing to adopt the consent agenda?
To the chair,
Yes.
I'd like to move the adoption of the following resolution, please.
Oh, comments from the audience, topics related to the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Early. Ms.
Flesher, I'd like to
Ms.
move the
Flesher.
adoption of the following
Yes.
resolution, please.
Support. Support. It's been moved by Mrs. Flesher and supported by Mrs. Early. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Nays, 6 ayes and 0 nays. Resolution adopted. Next item on the agenda is the presentation of MASB strategic planning. Mr. Bowers.
Thank you, Madam President. At this time, I would like to introduce to you this evening our special guest from the Michigan Association of School Boards, and that's Ms. Debbie Stair, to speak with the Board of Education about options when we think about upcoming strategic planning. And so with that, I will turn it over to Debbie.
Okay, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. The drive was a little scary when I left my house in Lansing and I started seeing salt trucks. I'm like, no, not yet. But it is a pleasure to be here with you this evening to talk about something that really is near and dear to my heart. Strategic planning is something that was very important to me as a school board member in my local district. So much so that I learned about it at an MASB event, took it home and put that information away until I was able to hire a superintendent 2 years later. And the two of us brought strategic planning to our district for the very first time. And I was just telling Cheryl earlier, it's hard to believe I've been gone from my district for 13 years. but they just finished their 5th round of strategic planning. So I really feel like that, probably more than anything else in my 15 years on the board, is the legacy I left. That it really has become a way of life for that community, that the community expects to be part of those decisions around what do we want to look like in the future, and even to some extent, how are we going to get there? And I say to some extent because a lot of that work is staff, but it really is an expectation there now. And it was something that allowed us to do some pretty incredible things that I wouldn't have thought were possible for our district prior to that process. So I do this work because I love it and I've seen the difference that it makes, and now I get to help other districts do the same thing. So here to talk about the process tonight and what it might look like. You each have a folder at your place. On the left-hand side is the cover letter and proposal that I think you've already seen. Is that right, Jason? Did they get that ahead of time?
No.
Oh, okay.
Nope.
So you've got those 2 documents, and then on the right-hand side is the PowerPoint that I'll be using tonight. So why are we even talking about this thing called strategic planning? Well, it's important to know that until the early 2000s, there had been no research regarding the effectiveness of school boards and what they could actually do to positively impact student achievement. And so our counterparts in Iowa undertook the Iowa Lighthouse Study, and it was the first comprehensive study ever. And NSBA, our national association, took that information and kind of distilled it down to the basics and said, all right, boards, if you were to pay attention to these 5 things, this is going to give you, for all intents and purposes, the biggest bang for your buck. If that makes sense. And so you'll notice that in the red, it talks about vision. That's one of the first things, is that a district needs to know what it is that they're working towards, and it's a board's responsibility to ensure that that vision is in place and that everyone's working toward it. Doesn't matter the hat you wear, your work looks different based on that, but you're still working towards the same vision together. And that's where the real synergy of strategic planning comes from. The other areas are equally as important: accountability, policy, community leadership, and relationships. And they actually all play a role in strategic planning. But I just wanted to highlight the vision piece because that's really what we're talking about primarily tonight. Once we have that vision in place, and we have district goals under that vision, and I'm going to talk about how we get there. Then, like I said, everybody's working on it together. And so whether it's your work as a board and making decisions based on that strategic plan, is the decision that I'm being asked to make tonight at the board table move us in the direction of that vision or not, or whether it's the superintendent, the staff, and I mean even so much as a bus driver or cafeteria worker. Right? There are roles for everyone to play in achieving that vision. But it's about setting of your own goals. There's actually a portion, if you think about it, in the superintendent evaluation. I don't know, do you use our tool or someone else's?
We use a different tool.
Okay, and so even given that, there's a mandatory component, at least right now. I don't know what the new legislation says, I think it's still there. But there's a mandatory component about progress towards district-wide goals. And so we suggest, if you have a strategic plan in place, that that's primarily the goals that you use for that part of the evaluation process, because you want the superintendent's focus directly on those goals. And then it actually filters down into other evaluations as well. Of course, who knows what the due evaluation? I have not read it yet, so. So I like to think of strategic planning as a roadmap. And my husband, even though he's not here tonight, would be happy that I say that, because I know most of us use GPS nowadays, but we always have to have a roadmap when we travel, right? So that we know what's along the road, in case we get sidetracked with something else. Years ago it was COVID, right? But we all had a roadmap for those districts that were doing a strategic plan to kind of get back on the main road and still head in the same direction. And honestly, that's what strategic planning is very much like. It's what's our vision, so our destination on a road trip, right? And then putting that map in place that's going to get us there. measured stops along the way, knowing that that's the way the work actually gets done, is in small chunks. So the benefits of using an outside facilitator, I put this on in the process early because I know even myself as board member would have asked that question. Why can't we have someone from within do it for us, right? And so I think it's important to have that conversation early on. So one of the things that having an outside facilitator allows you to do is everyone gets to participate equally. And that might sound a little weird, but you've hired your leadership for their expertise. And you want that expertise brought into the process. A facilitator, a good facilitator, doesn't put their voice in the process. They're simply moving the process forward, right? They're holding the sessions to get us there. They're managing the group processes as we have a retreat and an implementation meeting and input sessions, those kind of things. But their voice isn't heard because if it is, then it kind of muddies the waters. And it isn't an authentic process when that person who's leading actually talks about their own perspective or their own ideas or thoughts around the issue. So this way, all of your staff gets to participate. They don't have to give up their voice in this process. It also recognizes the time demands on your staff, because unless this staff is highly unusual, I bet they have more on their plates already than they can really handle on any given day, right? I mean, districts have cut back so far that, you know, we want them focusing on what it is that they're responsible for doing each and every day. So this way we're not taking time off of those tasks already. Because of the number of plans we do in a year and over time, we recognize barriers and opportunities that come up because we're a fresh set of eyes. We've seen a lot of things in a lot of school districts that help us help guide the process, and you know, it actually gives you a benefit of that fresh set of eyes looking in. Sometimes when you're in it, you don't always see the things that might pop up that might be new and different, a different way of thinking around something. And so we benefit from working with all those districts, both small and large and everything in between. We're also a neutral third party. And what I mean by that is when we hold input sessions and ask community and staff to provide us with feedback, they'll say things to us they would never say to an internal staff person. Sounds a little weird, but it's true. You know, there's always this hesitation about, oh, they know me, they know my kids, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'd really like to. With us, that's not an issue, because we don't know who they are, and so it's totally anonymous, whether we're talking about in-person or even the online survey that we do as well. And so we get the honest, raw truth. Sometimes it's pretty raw. But that's good, because we want the plan built on a really solid base, and so we want that honest feedback, right, from everybody, good and bad. So here's what our process looks like. I'm going to tell you that regardless of who would lead it, there's going to be some very similar components. But there are some definite differences in our process because we've designed ours specifically for school districts. And so in my 10 years of being at MASB, when I took this process over, and I was actually shadowing the person prior to me, and I was watching the process, and so we talked about how successful districts were being with it, and there was a lot of apprehension in that conversation because districts weren't really moving it forward. They would have this beautiful process, and then it would become a thing on the shelf. And when I took over, I said, that can't be the way this works. I know better. I can see the things that need to be done, and so we've totally changed our process because of that. And we continue, in the 10 years I've been there, to constantly improve our process. It's never a done deal. If there's something new and better that's going to serve districts better than what we currently have, we're going to do that, and I'll tell you about one of those things a little bit later. So 5 stages, and so in this beginning stage, we're just having this conversation, right? We're looking at any previous work you might have. We're talking about project scope and what that might look like. And we're gonna sort of move into the next phase once the board has determined that they want to move forward with us, and that's where the real work starts. That's when we start gathering data. And we gather two types of data, quantitative and qualitative, and anybody who tells you one or the other is enough is mistaken. It really is a complete picture when you see both kinds. So qualitative data is very subjective. It's about the way people feel about things. And so, as I mentioned, we do input sessions, and we do an online survey, and we even hold a virtual survey, getting at the root of how they feel about the district. We ask them the things they think are strengths and weaknesses and barriers, and what their vision is for the district. And those are really important conversations to have, because again, that really helps you understand the thinking of your community, both internal and external. And then we collect the quantitative data, the hard stuff, right, the numbers. And we collect that in a number of areas. We collect it in demographics and enrollment, academic performance, finance and personnel. And we're actually changing this right now. We're going to start working with IDEX, Munetrics. It's all one company now. I don't know if you use them or not, but we're going to start working with them to pull our data, and it's going to make our process so much smoother. It's going to be a real improvement for districts in the long run. So we'll collect that data, and the consultant that works with your district will then analyze both of those types of data. You know, we'll look at everything, read every comment, and then we'll put together all that information in a useful format. And what we do is we bring it to, let me just check something. Yeah, okay. So we bring it to a retreat, and we'll tell you more about that in a minute. And then we're going to come back and work with an implementation meeting where we work specifically with staff. And that's where we're going to actually start pairing up your strategic plan to your new MyKid school improvement process. So we don't want you to have one plan over here and one plan over here, and then the focus gets divided. So we bring the two plans together in alignment so that, again, narrow focus, we can do more with that synergy. And then we're going to come back and ask you for approval. So a couple of extra things in the pre-planning phase. We would start looking at dates and reference districts. In addition to your own data, we're going to pull data from 5 districts that the facilitator would work with the superintendent on. You obviously have some input in that. Ultimately, it's the superintendent and the facilitator who come up with the final 5 districts. Usually they're districts that are most like you in some ways we find useful over time, things like free and reduced lunch rates, special ed rates, household income, just that sort of thing, right? Nothing out of the ordinary that you would expect, but we have a number of criteria that we found useful. And then we also look at student movement, either students that you're gaining from other districts or that you're losing to other districts, because that can be important for you to know as well. So those would all be part of that pre-planning phase. I already sort of told you about that one. All right, so we take all that information and we bring it together at a retreat. Now I will tell you it's an 8-hour day, usually held on a Saturday, and we would expect the full board to participate if possible. I think it's really important for a couple of reasons. One, it shows your community that you're actively engaged in the work. 2, there's no surprises when it comes back to the board table for approval. You are all part of the discussion and part of the decision-making process that day. And really, 3, it gives you a different kind of opportunity to have conversations with your staff and community that a board doesn't often get. And so it's a great mix in the day. We set the tables so that there's a board member, administrator, a teacher, a parent, maybe an outside community member. So you're getting to really talk about all these great different perspectives in the district and then bringing ideas forward. Lots of work throughout the day, lots of activities. I always tease groups that it's 2 things that you're going to feel at the end of the day: exhaustion and exhilaration. Because your brain is really tired after 8 hours of all the work, but you're also really excited about what you've come to agreement on. And so it's really quite an interesting combination of feelings at the end of the day. But at the end of that day, you will have a vision, mission, belief statements, and then your goals. Now, if you already have some of those components, we're going to bring them into the process. We're going to look at them. Do we want to keep them? Do we want to tweak them? Do we want to throw them out and start fresh? And it's usually some combination of those things. But at the end of the day, you'll have those 4 things moving forward, and those will be the same 4 things we would come back and ask you to approve at the end of the process. So mission, vision, beliefs, and goal statements. I mentioned implementation meeting. So while the retreat is a group of very diverse individuals, as far as the background that they bring to the table, the hats they wear as far as their connection to the district, the implementation meeting is strictly staff. And it's usually staff, the superintendent invites staff that are going to be charged with implementation activities. Those who might sit in your school improvement teams, that sort of thing. It's usually a group of about 12 versus the retreat team, which is usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 40-ish. Might be a little larger, might be a little smaller, but usually 40 to 45 is what we like for the retreat team. But here it's usually about a dozen folks. And that's because what we need to do now is take advantage again of that expertise that they bring to the table. So now we already know what we want, right? Our vision, mission, beliefs, and goals. Now we're going to figure out how we're going to get there. And so and this is again where we start marrying it to the MyKit process. So we start using some of those processes that are important to that as far as data discovery and challenge statements, those kind of pieces that your district is already using in the area of academic performance and learning environment. We're just going to use some of those same activities in the other areas that we would have goal statements for. Now, we've been working really closely with the Department of Ed on putting our 2 processes together. And currently the platform is not built out to house the rest of the goal areas, but they promise it's going to get done. So that you can keep everything in the same area if you want. You can use the same report out systems if you want. It's not a requirement, but they understand that they kind of started the platform like in stage 2 instead of stage 1, which is all of the mission, vision, and beliefs that actually guide the work, even if you don't have a strategic plan in place. So they're kind of fixing that for us. But by the end of that day, we will have identified what we expect to be the first year activities. Targets is what they're called in MyKIP. So we would actually identify interim targets for the first year. We would calendar those out by quarter, and we would actually do some deep dive action plan samples on some of those things, because our goal at the end of this day is that your staff feels really comfortable in understanding how to take this great big process and these great big things that we want to achieve and start breaking them down into smaller and smaller pieces so they actually feel like they're doable. Because that's usually where districts falter, is it seems overwhelming and then we set it aside because we have all this other stuff to do. And when we start breaking it down and showing districts how they can achieve the work by looking at it in smaller chunks, it's much easier to start the movement. So we'll have done those things that day. We'll also talk about board monitoring options because it is one of the most important parts of the plan, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And we'll start talking about communication and what that looks like, because once you invite the community and staff into the process, it is critical that you communicate with them as you move through the life of the plan. They expect to hear what's going on. Otherwise, they start feeling like, whatever happened to that thing they said they were going to do, right? And instead, what we want them to do is say, oh, they made that decision and they're doing that initiative because that was part of what we identified in the strategic plan. Oh, I can get behind that. So what you do is you end up with a lot of ambassadors for some of the tougher decisions that boards have to make. And believe me, I've made some of those tough decisions, so I know. And so we'll talk about the importance of that day and some ways to do that. We'll come back to you, as I mentioned, for board approval. You'll get sort of the PR document, a one-pager that you could actually share the very next day if you wanted with folks to let them know what the end result is of the plan. We'll also give you a full summary document that will include all of the work product that we've collected up till that point, so that even if there are things that were identified as good ideas and we didn't maybe pull those to do for the first year initiatives, you still have all that good thinking that we generated from the group as you move forward in years 2 and 3 and beyond. We're going to ask you to adopt the plan that night. It sends a really strong message to your community. And we'll talk about some other ways to help get that message out. And then, as I mentioned, monitoring progress. I'm going to come back and talk to you, in addition to the implementation team, about the monitoring of progress. Because what we know is what gets monitored moves forward. I mean, that's the honest truth. It is the most important role in all of this that you as a board will play, is monitoring progress. And setting up a schedule that's regular. Now, what regular looks like is different for different boards and superintendent teams, but it's that regular updates that you expect to hear that keep the process. That's one of the things that helps it move forward. And then we'll talk to you about annual renewal options, should you choose to go down that road. So I put together what a sort of tentative proposed timeline would look like so that you'd have a sense. The typical plan takes about 4 months-ish. Some of it just depends on how quickly we start setting dates once the board decides to move forward. But if we were looking at tonight and then maybe potentially the approval of the process maybe at your December meeting, well then we would be ready to start working on it in January. We would start those input sessions. And we would start it with the board as the first group, so you get to see what those input sessions look like. And then we'd move into the other groups. We would do your staff and your community. We would even do some of your student groups. And Shirley, I know, heard me tell this story in the strategic planning CBA class, but we used to just do high school students. And one day when I got to a district, it was a combination junior, senior high school, and there had been some miscommunication along the line as it made it to that principal. So I walked into a room of 18 middle schoolers. And there was a bit of panic that set in for just a minute, and then it was like, no, I had 3 sons, I won't be able to handle this. It's been a while, but I should be able to handle this. What we found out is middle schoolers are great to give you input. Like, they're not that far from their elementary years, so they know exactly what they liked and didn't like. Lots of opinions there. They are always looking forward, so they have lots of opinions about what's going on at the high school level as well. And the best part about it is no one has taught them yet to have a filter. Honestly, right? High schoolers, some of them have filters. They're a little more cautious about what they say to adults. Middle schoolers, not so. So that was one of those happy accidents that actually improved our process, because now we always talk to middle schoolers as well. So we would start all of that collection. I mentioned we would have an online survey component as well. And then usually at the end of that collection, we also hold a virtual. So for anybody who wants to participate, we're going to make it as easy as possible for them in whatever form they feel comfortable providing us with input. We're also going to do all of that data collection for your district and the 5 other districts. Now know that because we're working with Munitrix and IDEX, we're going to get the bulk of all of that data directly from those other state reporting sources, except for a couple things we'll have to ask the district for, which revolves around your personnel. It's usually your instructional seniority and their education level, and then dual enrollment if you have that. Those are the one thing that you don't quite report to the state the same way we need it. So we would be doing all of that in January, and we would complete that work and the analysis behind it potentially in February. And we could actually see that we might be able to have a retreat sometime in March or April. Again, it always depends on when Easter falls and when you have your spring breaks. But somewhere in that neighborhood, we would be able to do the retreat. And then usually about 2 weeks later, we do the implementation workshop. And then we would be coming back to the board, potentially in May or June, for actual approval. We like to wrap up those components that have other individuals involved in it, community and staff, before the beginning of May, because once May 1st starts, everybody's checked out. They are moving on to summer. And we want to make sure that we create as much enthusiasm behind the plan as possible. And so we would want to have it wrapped up by then. And then that gives the board and the district a chance to plan over the summer for how it's all gonna start moving in the next school year. In the background, things that you wouldn't necessarily see, but we provide templates for a lot of things. So press releases, I don't know if you have typical local press coverage. Some districts do, some don't, but we provide some templates for those things. And then templates for all of the invitations to all the different activities. So again, we're trying to keep your staff as little work as possible. You just have to kind of, put the finishing touches on, but all the information is there. And then we provide meeting updates. Because once we meet with the board for their input session, we don't typically see you all again until the retreat. But as a board member, you're kind of wondering what's going on. How many people are participating, how many groups have we held? So we provide those updates to the superintendent to provide to you, so that you're always kept aware of what's going on. Last but not least, really just to highlight, it's important for you to approve moving forward with the process. Again, it sends a message to your community and your staff that this is an important thing we're about to undertake. You would have your own input session, right, as I mentioned. We would want you to encourage participation. We know that a personal ask is going to move people much quicker than something in a newsletter or posting on a sign. Those things are still important, but a personal ask for you all to say, hey, can you just take a couple minutes, and it's only 5 questions, can you answer those for us? And it will really raise your numbers significantly. We would ask that you would suggest participants for the retreat. However, the superintendent and the facilitator will make the final call on the makeup of the room, because we have to make sure that we're balancing perspectives and different voices and that sort of thing. But by all means, you probably have some ideas about who you might think would be a good participant. Again, participate in the retreat itself, adopting it at the end, and then that all-important monitoring progress. So with that, the only thing else I would say is that should you decide to move forward with MASB as your partner, I would work on the plan. And the only time I work on the plans at this point is when I'm training somebody. So I would have one of my new consultants work with me, who happens to be a school board member in a not too far district away from here. So she'll bring, and she's a school administrator, so she'll bring a lot of good flavor to the conversation as well. So with that, I would certainly be willing to entertain any questions you might have.
Anyone have any questions?
I do.
Yes.
This is more for Mr. Bob than, we're gonna do the bond thing in, what is it? Is that August or is that? I'm just
it would be
wondering
May.
how that would be related, because I wouldn't wanna overburden staff with trying to get all that ready and delve into a new process.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I think wise thinking for sure, because we would want to take that into consideration most definitely. At the same time, if the board were to go either of those 2 routes for the election time frame about our restoration or renewals as well as strategic planning, those 2 things could run simultaneously and would not compete too much. But you're right, we would want to be very thoughtful about that in terms of not putting too much on the spring plate, like Debbie had shared.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly if you decided to move into a fall slot, we don't typically do plans over the summer. because you can't get anybody's attention, as you can imagine. Then usually we start as soon as possible after school begins so that you can take advantage of everyone's paying attention to everything, right, when they come back to school. And then usually we wrap them up sometime around the holidays. Again, we've got a lot of holidays in the fall to deal with, including hunting in Michigan. And so sometimes it bleeds over into January, but even a fall start gives you, you know, all of your initiatives identified prior to going into your next budget cycle. So.
That's all I have. Anyone else?
Madam President,
Yes.
if I may, I want to thank you in particular, Madam President, for the idea of bringing Debbie from MASB here to present to the Board of Education this evening. Strategic planning has been a priority of both the board as well as myself, as well as Amy and Linda and James. You know, it's been quite some time since the district has embarked on the strategic planning process, and I know that we're all in agreement in terms of the wisdom surrounding strategic planning. So thank you for the idea, and also appreciate Debbie's willingness to share with us the options should the board elect to go with the route of the Michigan Association of School Board. I think, you know, Debbie did a nice job this evening of encapsulating some of the highlights of MASB, because when Amy and I were doing some reminiscing, unless people recall differently, to our knowledge, the district has never partnered with an outside source or an entity for the reasons that Debbie spoke about tonight. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of benefit should that be the direction that the board wants to go. I'm also super encouraged to see the link to the MyKit process. I know that's something that Amy and I regularly speak about, is to avoid some of that duplicity that you heard Debbie speak to this evening, and just the overall context. And so there is some additional materials. We intentionally decided to not share it with the board in advance of tonight so that the board could have an opportunity to review the materials at your leisure, because we also knew that there was going to be the context that Debbie brought to us this evening. And you know, I would encourage the board to step away from the table tonight and take some time to think about it, because it is a priority of ours that should the board want to move in this direction, and if the timeline is similar to what the board is thinking, we could potentially have it as a discuss and a consider at our December meeting, Madam President, should that be the will of the board. So I know that that's not a discussion for tonight, but I would just encourage each board member to consider that as we step away from the conversation after hearing from Debbie tonight. So.
And after you've had time to review the proposal, it really is just kind of a written form of the kinds of things I talked about tonight. But if you find that you have questions, because if you're like me at all, my best questions come to me on the drive home or when I'm about to fall asleep, right? It'll be like, oh, why didn't I ask that? You've got my contact information. By all means, reach out. I want to make sure that you have all your questions answered before you make a decision. And so, you know, I am at your beck and call as your membership association. So,
Thank you, Debbie.
all right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Shirley, for
I'd like to
being
thank
so
you,
determined.
Debbie.
Thank you.
And I'm going to head home. So,
All right.
Safe
Drive
travels.
safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie.
Be safe.
get you guys up there.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is financial audit.
Thank you, Madam President. At this time, I would like to introduce our partner from Plant Moran this evening, Mr. Jeff Higgins, to share the audit report with the Board of Education. Jeff.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Again, as was mentioned, my name is Jeff Higgins. I'm a partner with Plant Moran in charge of the independent audit for the district for the year ended June 30th, 2023. So we're here to talk about the results for the last year, and I guess just starting off as a bit of a summary. So there's 3 documents that result from the audit process. So there's a financial report with supplemental information, which includes the district's audited financial statement. There's a separate federal awards supplemental information, which represents the separate audit of the federal programs that are administered by the district. And finally, there's the report to the Board of the Academy, which provides you some background insight into the audit process itself. So again, it's our job as the Academy, or as the district's independent auditor, to provide an opinion on the district's financial statements based on our audit, which is conducted in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America. And I'm happy to report here tonight that we've issued, as you see, what's called an unmodified or clean opinion on the district's financial statements. This will be the highest level of assurance that we can provide on a set of financial statements. So again, a clean audit report for the year ended June 30th, 2023. And with that, we will touch upon a few of the financial highlights for the year. This is a condensed balance sheet for what are known as the governmental funds. So again, the activities of the district are reported in various funds, which are used to demonstrate the accountability of the district for how it spends its money and certain financial resources. So the general fund represents the primary operating account for the district. You'll see next is the debt service fund, which records the tax receipts, and then other revenue sources which are used for the payment of long-term debt, basically the bonds, the food service fund, the sinking fund, and then the 2021 building and site funds. But again, just focusing on the general fund for just a moment, you'll see that there's total assets as of June 30th, 2023 of about $16.7 million, liabilities of $8 million. The difference between those two is your fund balance, which is towards the bottom there, of $8.7 million. Just real quickly, you'll notice there's that one line item there that's highlighted. I'll come back to this in a couple of minutes, but I did want to point this out. That's a assignment of your fund balance. It's titled Budgeted Use of Fund Balance in Subsequent Year. Basically, this represents the amount when the board adopted its budget for June 30th, 2023. The budget that was adopted is a usage of fund balance of about $3.2 million. So of your $8.7 million fund balance, we're planning on using $3.2 million of it this next fiscal year, at least based on the budget that was originally adopted. So again, your budget is adopted in June of 2023 for the next fiscal year for June 2024. So I'm going to come back to that in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to highlight that number because we will talk a little bit more about fund balance in just a moment. The next slide then is essentially just the income statement for the various funds, the fund statement of revenue, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. Again, just focusing on the general fund, you can see you have total revenues of about $54.5 million compared to total expenditures of $57.7 million. There are some other financing sources, just some transfers. So during the year ended June 30th, 2023, in the general fund, you can see we had a net change or reduction of fund balance of about $3.1 million. So again, we used some of those financial reserve, about $3.1 million. You'll see those other funds did there during the year. The one I wanted to point out, the 2021 building and site fund, so you see that was a reduction of about $8 million. So again, that's the planned spending of the bond proceeds. How that fund works is when you sold the bonds in 2021, all that money comes in, and then as that construction progress continues on, it just spends those proceeds down. So in 2023, we expended about $8 million of that continuing bond project. Next, we just take a look at the general fund revenue, some of the financial highlights there. So again, this is for the year ended June 30th. You can see in 2023, we had total revenues of about $54 million compared to about $51 million in 2022. And as you obviously can see there, the state revenue makes up the majority of that, about 74% of the total revenue. And that's primarily driven by the per pupil foundation allowance. So again, the vast majority of funding for school districts in Michigan is driven by the per pupil foundation, which is essentially determined in Lansing as part of the annual State Aid Act. So that per pupil foundation for South Redford was $9,150 per pupil. So if you take that by your blended membership count, about 6,300 students, that drives the vast majority of the revenue. So the important thing to keep in mind there is that school districts in Michigan, if you think of the revenue side of the ledger and the expenditure side of the revenue, school districts really have very little ability to have a significant influence on the revenue side. It's really dependent on your pupil count for a significant portion of your revenue. So it's really on the expenditure side where districts have, essentially because the revenue's at some level fixed for you in Lansing, it's really the management of the expenditure side of the ledger which helps them determine kind of the financial overall health of the district. The other thing I wanted to point out on this slide is you'll see federal revenue this last year was about 10.66% of total revenue. That was about 5.8 million. And of that 5.8 million, about 3 million was education stabilization fund money. So again, COVID relief funds. Over the last several years, there's been various sources of funding that were in response to COVID, the COVID pandemic. The district over the last several years has received close to, call it $10 million in total for the last several years in COVID relief funds. The important thing to keep in mind there is that those programs are now coming to an end. So those dollars that the district has received, and you'll hear a lot of talk about what they sometimes refer to as the fiscal cliff. And so it's a challenge for districts that they have this money that's coming in, but because that's not a long-term funding source, it's how do you manage those dollars without creating structural challenges in your budget now that those revenue sources are essentially ending. The next slide, we take a look at general fund expenditures. You can see again in 2023 we had total expenditures in general fund of about 57.7 million. The majority of that would be classroom instruction, about 57.6. This would be activities, directly dealing with the teaching of pupils or the interaction of teachers and pupils. You see that's down a little bit from last year, about 60%, but I wouldn't get too concerned about that number because you'll see that the flip side is the capital outlay number, so it's that sort of orangish number there. It's a little bit small to see, I apologize, but last year was about 1.6%, this year it's about 4.5%. Because really what happened is a lot of those COVID relief funds were actually used on capital outlay type activities. So we talked about the one-time dollars, so what the district was using those one-time dollars for was improvements in the various facilities as allowed under that program. Just, air circulation, filtration, those types of things. So, once those one-time type dollars are expended, if you kind of take those out, your percentage would be very similar to last year in terms of the percent of dollars spent on classroom instruction. Again, it is important to keep in mind that it's a pretty strict definition for instruction. So again, it's that kind of direct teacher-pupil interaction. So a lot of support services like counselors, libraries, those types of things are defined by the state of support services. So those are included in the support service number on this graph. The next graph, we take a look at the budget to actual for the year just to see, obviously the board passes its budgets on an annual basis, and how did we come into actual. So the final budget that was adopted, that bottom line number, we planned on using about $2.8 million of our fund balance, and the actual number was about 3.1. So we came in within about 1% of the budget. So again, came in more or less in line with what the planned result was for the year based on the budget that was adopted. This next graph then takes a look at our fund balance percentage. So as you'll recall, I talked at that first graph about how we had budgeted to use about 3.2 million of our fund balance for June 30th, 2024. Then we also talked about how we used about 3 million of our fund balance for the year ended June 30th, 2023. So fund balance, just to give some perspective, it really represents the financial reserves for the district. Sometimes you hear it referred to as like a rainy day fund. But what fund balance is important is it really helps the district mitigate current and future financial risks. So, if there's revenue shortfalls, unexpected changes in enrollment, unexpected expenditures such as unanticipated, building or maintenance costs, it really helps deal with those financial surprises that can be that can happen during the course of the year. And it really helps the district address those financial surprises while still maintaining its current financial programming. So that's really the importance of fund balance. Then the question becomes is, how do we determine what the adequate or appropriate level of fund balance might be? Fund balance is often assessed as a percentage of the expenditures of your budget. So for example, for South Redford, if you take our general fund balance at the end of the year, in total about $8.7 million, you divide that by your total expenditures of 57.7 million, that gives you a fund balance percentage of 15.1% for the year ended June 30th, 2023. So this graph goes and gives you some kind of benchmarking data for the last several years for how did South Redford compare to the statewide average. And you can see for the last several years, South Redford has been above that state average fund balance percentage. So again, last year, for example, we were at about 24% compared to 19.2% for this statewide averages for 2022. We don't have statewide data yet for 2023, but I would expect, just based on other districts that I've seen, that the statewide percentage will probably be more or less consistent, would be my expectation, somewhere in that 19 to 20% range for June 30th, 2023. So again, we had the $3 million reduction, so you can see what it looks like for the first time in several years. I would expect that South Redford will be below that state average fund balance percentage. And again, if the budget that was adopted for June 5th, 2024 ends up being where you end up, again, we're going to use another $3 million of fund balance. So all other things being equal, that fund balance percentage would be at about 10% as of June 30th, 2024. So again, that 10% fund balance percentage, again, I would expect we're going to be below state average for 2023. If you look at various groups who sort of give some guidelines and some goalpost metrics, so the Michigan School Business Officials tends to recommend a 15% fund balance percentage. The Governmental Finance Officers Association recommends a 20% fund balance. So it appears by any metric we could be below some of those benchmark guidelines. And again, we've used up $3 million in 2022. We're, at least at this point, anticipating using up another $3 million, 2023 and 2024. That is, I think, the one message I would like to leave behind is that we've had a couple years where we're expecting to use a pretty significant portion of our fund balance, and we're getting down to that level where it's going to start to be something that you're dropping below some of those recommended benchmarks. And I would also say that the state has early warning legislation, so the state is concerned about districts actually going into a deficit. So a few years back, they adopted what's called early warning legislation, where they have some benchmarks to identify districts that could be showing signs of financial distress. The state uses a 5% fund balance percentage, and they measure it a little bit differently, but you could sort of assume that 5% fund balance percentage for a 2-year period, the state would take to be an indication of potential financial distress, and there's additional oversight and monitoring and reporting that the district would be required to do. So again, I just wanted to, if I look at the year, the district has done a great job the last several years, really administering its financial resources. We've had some dips here. I think just keep that in mind as we're progressing through the year, that we do want to keep an eye on that fund balance level to make sure we're leaving an adequate level of reserve there to deal with those financial uncertainties. But we don't want to leave on a down note. We always want to try to leave some level of positive comments as we wrap things up. So this is just a quick summary of June 30th, 2023. Again, the county-wide enhancement millage is now in its 7th year. That was originally approved for 2016 through 22. It was reauthorized, and now it runs through 2028. So we have an additional funding of $1.3 million for 2023. Again, the 2021 bond project is progressing. That's a significant undertaking, certainly for the administration, to manage a bond program of that size, and that is continuing to progress. Obviously, you had to manage a significant influx of federal funding, and there's always strings attached to those dollars, so there's a lot of monitoring and types of activities in terms of what it could be spent on there. And then obviously we're still, some of the other highlights just offering the preschool programs and the elementary schools, and so still lots of positive things, of course, going on in the district. But that concludes the formal presentation. Again, a quick summary of the results for June 3rd, 2023. If there's any questions tonight, I'd be happy to address those.
Any questions? So, tell me, how do we stand?
So how do you stand? So again, from purely a financial perspective, like I said, I think it really comes down to that fund balance number. That is what we would look at. Again, it's looking at sort of the financial cushion, if you will, the financial reserves or the resources of the district. And so that, from my perspective as an outside third party looking at the district, we've had a couple years or, like I said, 2023, we've had a pretty significant reduction. 2024, at this point, there's another planned reduction. I would just be careful about 2025 and going forward that we try to do something to mitigate those reductions in fund balance. That, from my perspective, would be the one thing to really keep an eye on.
Madam President,
Yes.
if I may. Jeff, thank you so much for your work and your efforts and the presentation this evening. But I also want to thank the Board of Education, because a friendly reminder that some of those reductions in fund balance that Jeff shared with us tonight in the bar graphs is out of the generosity of the Board of Education in 3-year increases for all of our staff members. So, and the increases that were results of those collective bargaining agreements were, to my knowledge, the greatest increases that the Board of Education and the unions collectively bargained in a number of years. And so each year that included very generous increases for each staff member, you know, in the capacity in which they serve in. So that's some of what you see as well. The other piece too is also a thank you to the Board of Education for its ongoing commitment to building a career technical education program within the South Redford School District. Going back to what Debbie was talking about with strategic planning of career technical education. So I know board members have heard relentlessly the need to bring back career technical education and the importance behind that. And our Board of Education was willing to champion the cause. And the voters, as we know, overwhelmingly supported the 2021 bond efforts. And so with that, that's also some of the reduction that you're seeing. So we brought on 5 career technical education teachers, all on steps. We've also hired a career technical education coordinator. And we're still staffing the amount of classes that we do here within the South Redford School District, which for a high school of our size, particularly at Thurston, it's an anomaly. So I want to say thank you to the Board of Education, because some of those reductions that you're seeing in those graphs is because we've been good to our people. We always have been, and generous increases, and then also building career technical education programs from the ground up. You know, some other neighboring areas, they've been around for a while, but there's a lot of capital investment that the board has continued to invest. And then also we lost approximately 90 to 100 students last year. But like we recently spoken about, we've successfully reversed that trend, and now we're flat. And you know, the other piece that has come in is that the legislature delivered on the state budget for the current educational year that we're in now. That, to Jeff's point, we didn't have those details when the board approved those numbers in June. And so we're in a much better position now than what we were in June with those cautionary notes that Jeff spoke to. And hats off to Linda and LaToya and Alicia for all their efforts as the Department of Finance to come within 1% with all the funds that you heard Jeff speak about. It's pretty impressive. And so just want to say much thanks to the Finance Department, Linda and her team, with Alicia and LaToya and all their hard work too. So I would just encourage the board to keep those things in mind as well. But also thank the board for its ongoing commitment, especially when we talk about taking care of our people, and then also building career technical education programming from the ground up. So.
To the chair.
Yes.
Jason said a lot of good things, but I want to remind the board, we have drawn down over $6 million in 2 years. And like Jeff said, our fund balance is dropping. We've done some fabulous things, but we cannot continue to spend like we're spending. We'll be negotiating again sooner than later. The money is not coming in like it used to be. We're not banking into our fund equity and building that. So I think this board has to, even though we've done great things, we're going to have to put the brakes on it and really consider moving forward. We need to stay financially responsible. What good is a tech center and putting all this money if we can't afford down the road to pay our teachers and stuff? So I think as we go through the upcoming budget years, if we continue 3 million and 2 cycles of our budget, we will be broke. And none of you guys were here during our darkest times when we had to cut programs and what it did to the community, except Lori and I. And I take this, even though we've done great things, we can't spend what we don't have, and we have to have a plan in place to keep us whole. You know, to me, I see a lot of good, but I'm extremely worried, personally, as the board's treasurer, that we have to have a plan moving forward, and we have to be very careful with our dollars. And that's all I have to say.
Anyone else?
Madam President, should the board not have any further conversation on the topic, when the board is prepared, there is a resolution for the board to consider in terms of accepting the audit that Jeff so kindly presented to us this evening, when the board's ready.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I do have one comment. And I know this was years ago, before a lot of the members that are sitting on the board now were here. But we had made a conscious decision not to fall below 15%. And I fear that that's what we're doing, and, you know, just want to be cautionary that, you know.
Madam President, if I may, I believe Mrs. Hicks is accurate. That range that the board set some time ago, I believe, is between 10 and 15%.
Mm-hmm.
And she is accurate, and it was in that range of 10 to 15%.
To the chair.
Yeah.
I have a question, since we're talking about things of past. Were there anything in place in case you did fall under that? Like, what, for us that weren't here before, what was the plan if you did fall below?
We had to start looking at our budget a whole lot more carefully.
I mean, that would have
That was
been the
pretty
plan.
much our,
So all of these years that we have been absolutely great over the fund balance, I don't think that we took on all the things that we are taking on right now. So to me, in my eyes, I know we're right at where you guys wanted, but in the reality of that, things are happening. You know, like some serious things in education that we need to be above board on or move with. You know, and I truly understand, I fully understand what the thought processes was behind the 10 to 15%, because I agree with it. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that we spend a lot of time talking about things of old. I think we need to be forward progressing and
Well,
think about
I
those
don't
things as
disagree.
well.
And Madam President, if I may, to Lori's point as well as Misha's point, you know, there was a time or two in the relatively recent past where our fund equity was about 9%. And like Lori shared, and Misha shared, how do we be and remain future focused, but also continue to be fiscally responsible and balancing those two things. And so it was, you know, holding both of those two things in harmony together. But there has been, you know, a time or two where that's been the case, and you know, budget was much more of a focus, and then also making sure that we're being future focused as well, and that those two things were in harmony. So.
To the chair,
Yeah.
can I move the resolution, please?
Yes, I was just getting ready to ask, is there a board member willing to move the adoption of the resolution?
support.
Mrs. Fletcher and Mrs. Hicks. All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? 6 ayes, 0 nays. Resolution adopted.
All right, well,
Thank you.
thank you, I
Thank you.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
So I appreciate the help of Linda, Alicia, in the business office. I don't want to be the, deliver bad news. I mean, there are lots of great things going on in the district, but I think as you've summed up really well, it's trying to balance those with sort of longer term financials. So, one of the many challenges that school districts have to deal with. But thank you, I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jeff.
All righty. Next item on the agenda is presentation refinancing 2014.
So, Madam President, if I may, we're going to continue some of our financial discussions this evening. And I would like to turn it over to Carrie Blanchette from PFM,
Okay.
as well as Brody Killian, who are going to co-present to us this evening on the possibility of refinancing 2014 bond. Turn it over to Carrie and Brody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So hopefully this is a little bit more positive than the discussion we were just having, or easier discussion than the discussion we were just having. Brody and I are here to talk about refinancing your debt. My name again, Carrie Blanchett, PFM. I'm the financial advisor to the district on your debt financings. Brody, you wanna?
Hi, I'm Brody Killian. I'm with Stiefel Public Finance, and we are a municipal bond underwriter. So we serve as the intermediary between you and the investors that want to ultimately own your bonds.
And we'll have a page that talks about what my role is versus his, versus bond counsel. Okay. Am I doing something wrong here?
Just left from the on.
Wouldn't it be
Yep, that one right there.
this one?
Click it one more time just to see. Oops. Anything?
Yep.
All right.
So basically, a refinancing of a bond is very similar to refinancing your home mortgage. You're taking out one debt that you're paying a higher interest rate and replacing it with a new debt with lower interest rates. You typically, a school that generally does a refunding to save money. Although, you know, you can refinance debt to restructure it, or give you budget relief and certain types of other debt. But the factors that make a refunding work, which might seem a little bit odd in this market environment that we find ourselves in now, where we're all finally earning more money on our, investments. It's not just the short-term interest rates, but it's really the long-term interest rates. So lower interest rates will make refunding work. And that's really what has been the case in most of your prior refinancings, but also just the passage of time. So if you sold a 30-year bond 30 years ago, 10 years down the line, that 30-year maturity is now a 20-year maturity. And normally your yield curve is the 1 year out is the lowest rate and 30 years is the highest rate. Right now we have an anomaly where your short end of the yield curve is inverted. So we're getting higher interest rates on the, let's say, 1 and 2 year term than we are on some of the later maturities. But so the school district has a 2014 refunding bond outstanding. The federal government only allows you to do a refinancing of a tax-exempt debt when it is currently callable. So this bond could not have been refunded before 2024 for tax-exempt interest rates. So we can deliver a refunding bond anytime after February of 2024 because the bonds are callable in May of 2024. So it has to be within 3 months of a call date of the bonds being callable to be a current refunding and to be able to refund it using the tax exempt interest rates. Brody's going to talk about the market in a few minutes, but what we have here is just a summary of what the current savings on the refunding of that 2024 bond looks like. And it is a total savings of just over $500,000, or present value of about $450,000. That represents the percentage of the savings as a percentage of the bonds to be refunded, 4.27%. Generally, we like that savings threshold to be about anywhere from 2 to 3% to proceed with the refunding. But these bonds really, you're at the end of the cycle. There's not a lot of years remaining on this. So it's sort of squeezing that last bit of juice out of these bonds, because these are already refunding bonds. You've already saved on the bond payments once. Now you're going to potentially save again another $500,000. That $500,000 is savings that is passed through to the taxpayers. It's not money that goes in your general fund, so it doesn't help you with the other, operations of the school. It just basically reduces your debt payments that you charge millage rate for your taxpayers. What we've shown here also in the bond, I point out the bonds that we're suggesting that you refund are carrying an interest rate of 5%, where the new bonds would carry an interest rate of 3.49%. So that's what produces the savings. The savings percentage, the little graph at the right, just shows you what would happen to that savings number percentage if rates increased or decreased. So if rates increased by 0.25%, the savings would go down to 3.37%. If they decreased by 0.25%, they go up to 5.18%. So again, you won't be able to lock in those savings until right around January of next year, which is when you could lock in rates and deliver them in February. You could do it later than that also, but the more time that elapses, the less bonds you will have to refund and the less savings you'll have. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is the timeline that you would typically go through when you're refinancing debt. The first step is for the school board to adopt a bond authorizing resolution. It doesn't commit you to doing anything. It just gives the administration the authority to proceed if the savings is right. So if rates jumped up and it didn't make sense anymore, you just sort of set it on hold and come back to it later. But that resolution will allow the administration and the finance team to start preparing the documents that are needed to do the refinancing. A prospectus has to be prepared describing the debt, describing the finances of the district. We'll talk about fund balance, where it is, where your budget is, look at your past fund balance. And then if the market is right and we decide to move into the market, that is circulated to potential investors. We also obtain a credit rating on the school district. So these numbers assume the credit rating of the school district remains the same. The bonds are also qualified by the state, which means they guarantee the payment. So you will also get the state's strong credit rating assigned to the bonds. And that helps get you a lower interest rate. So on the day of pricing, the interest rates are locked in. And then we finalize the structure and finalize the savings. And then just proceed with the closing of the bonds. So at the time of closing, you will deliver new bonds that will replace the old bonds that will be effectively called in on May 1st of 2024. This is just sort of an overview, because oftentimes schools or our clients get confused with who are the people like Brody and I that you work with. The school district typically works with 3 key finance team members. We are a municipal advisor, so we're your financial advisor. It's our job to bring you ideas like this, the refinancing. We work with you on your bond issue like your 2021, or we'll be working with you on your next series, the final series of that bond issue. But we structure the debt, give you structure ideas on your millage. We work with you on the rating process, but really important as a part of our role is we have a fiduciary responsibility to the district to always act in your best interest. So it doesn't matter if it's not in our best interest, we must always tell you that whatever our advice is, would be whatever is in your best interest. So a lot of times that means we recommend clients not do something, even though it means we don't get paid. That's, if we were found to do anything different, we would lose our license and we wouldn't be able to do this. Bond counsel, who you've worked with Miller Canfield on your bond financings, it's their job to make sure that the legal documents are in order. They prepare them, make sure you're within the authorized law. These would be tax exempt bonds. They would deliver the opinion to the purchasers of the bonds that the bonds are exempt from federal and state income taxes. That's a pretty important role. But they also are part of the process, reviewing the documents, reviewing the offering document to make sure it's within the federal guidelines so that you don't get into any problems. I'm going to let Brody talk about the underwriter's role.
So the bond underwriter, which is the role that Stiefel plays, and someone that you've worked with in the past on your 2021 bond sale, is essentially the intermediary, I'll use that term again, between the district who is trying to get the capital for whether it's a new money project, or in this case, the discussions around raising new money to pay off the old bonds. And so Stiefel is an investment bank that is a broker dealer, and we have a network of salespeople across the country that work with institutional and high net worth investors to place their bonds. Because to recall, that bond you're selling is an investment to someone on the other end. And they're going to invest in that and then receive coupon payments and then principal payments on that as they are paid out by the district. So that's the role of the underwriter. Our relationship is an arm's length relationship. We actually have a responsibility to the investors as well. And so it's important when you are creating your team that the municipal advisor's role as your fiduciary is ultimately the one that's going to help you and your administrators and then ultimately your board to determine the best method of sale, and then also the type of people that you would want to bring in, like a Stiefel, to be your underwriter.
Is there any questions on that? And I don't know.
What is the amount of the bond that we're refinancing?
The amount that's remaining on that would be, I have numbers, about $10 million. There are detailed savings analysis that the administration have. I'm not sure if they were in the package or not. But there is another presentation on market. $10,645,000. And Brody and I looked up it up. We're always tracking this issue. Refunded the 2014 refunded another bond that was traced with 2005.
2005, correct.
It refunded two issues. The portion that's still outstanding is the 2005 issue.
So, Madam President,
Yes.
if I may, so some of what Carrie's referring to in that is the board took similar like action about 9 or 10 years ago that then put everybody, correct me if I'm off base here, on better footing for the most recent bond that we did where taxpayers could then vote without seeing their property taxes increase. Am I
That's a
saying that
yes, yes.
accurately? In terms of the measurable impact from the last time that the board did this? So that then we could go out to the voters to ask for bond proceeds at a 0% increase in property taxes because of taking a similar like action. So we're really forecasting out to the future. I don't know if there's anything you want to add
Yeah, and
or
that's-
subtract from what I said.
No, that's exactly right, and when we do this structure, we'll be having those conversations. What is your needs in the future? Because you want to make sure you take into consideration the big picture, right? What are your needs, do we need to set that structure so we could provide a drop in the millage rate in X year? Should we take all the savings up front? Should we put it somewhere, where in that life should we put it? So that you have the most flexibility going forward with your needs.
Mhm.
One more question. If I understood you right, the Fed increases rates, our savings are less. But if they leave them the same or they go down, then our savings is more.
Well, that's the, I'll just interchange Fed with general interest rates environment.
Okay.
So the municipal bond market really moves independently of the Fed. They will move somewhat together, but it's not like one for one.
Okay.
So where we are at in the market today is really at a precipice of where we think it might go, or perhaps where others may think it might stay. So we're really at a critical moment of what the Fed's next move is going to be. And most think that they're going to be done. Now, there's a lot that could change, and they look at economic data every week, but we're hoping that this most recent decrease in rates that we've seen will continue. It's anyone's guess, but the reason we put in that sensitivity analysis is so that you can get an idea of making a decision today on a resolution. It gives you an idea of the kind of the success that you'll have as you move forward. And it looks like a 25 basis point increase would still be within the range of a recommended refinancing. So it gives you a bit of a buffer.
Yeah, the Fed is short-term rates. So in our market, I always say, bad news is good news. If the economy slows, if things aren't going great, that lowers interest rates. So you hate to say that, but I look for things to be not so good. And this last lowering of rates was because the economy isn't doing quite as well as the Fed had thought it was going to be doing.
Just wanted to make sure I had that straight in my brain.
That's right.
In the meantime, make money on your investments for a change, which it helps your budget.
Mhm.
Well, I provided a few slides as well on the market. Those are in front of you. And, rather than maybe go through those on the screen, what I can just tell you is just from a general point of view, we are definitely living in interesting times. We are coming out of the Fed's increasing of rates to slow down inflation in the economy, coming out of the pandemic. And it appears that they are done. And so that is helping rates starting to go down. So for those of us that have home mortgages, or in the case of a school district that has outstanding debt, rates have started to turn back around and are producing the savings that Carrie had just discussed with you. The other element within the bond markets that we like to look at as well is what is supply looking like. And so when you go into the market in 2024, one of the things that we work with PFM on is to ensure that when you're going in to sell your bonds, that you're going to be the marquee deal of that day within Stifel's Michigan calendar. And so what we're anticipating for 2024 is that supply, while it may be a little higher than what we are seeing right now in Michigan, from a historical standpoint, the cohort of 2024 Michigan bonds that are anticipated to come to market is much lower than we've seen historically. So that's a positive trend for you. And then the other thing is, when you're starting a new calendar year, we tend to see more money available from the investment community than we see toward the end of the year. And that's because of kind of a rebalancing of portfolios at the end of the year. And oftentimes in January of each calendar year, we see rates at the lowest point that they are throughout the year. We call that the January effect. So your timing of looking at this opportunity, where you would go into the market in January and price the issue and then close it in February, lines up pretty good with some of those factors that we're looking at in the market today. Any questions? And there's a few other slides in there that talks about, where rates have gone from a historical standpoint. But I think the key items that, that we wanted to hear from, I think Carrie covered those really well.
And again, the savings are preliminary. It would be based on the interest rates at the time of sale. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I wore my Thurston socks.
Nice.
Next item on the agenda is discuss refinancing 2014 bond.
So, Madam President, if I may, we heard from Carrie and Brody, their accessibility to the board as well as the district as a whole would continue on, should this be a direction that the board would like to go. Similarly to how our boards have previously acted when it's made good financial sense to do such. And so, I'm comfortable and confident that the information with what the two of them have presented to the Board of Education is certainly worthy of consideration. I don't know if there's any additional discussion this evening from the Board of Education. And if it is the will of the board to continue down this path, then we can bring it back for a consider at either our next meeting or a future meeting, if this is a path that the board would like to go down. And if not, then, as was previously shared, we could always look at it again, whether it be now or into the future.
What is the will of the board?
To the chair,
Yes.
I would like to hear what Linda thinks as our finance director.
Well, I'll be perfectly honest with you that the reason why Carrie and Brody are here is because they're the experts in this field. I have 100% trust in both of them and their opinions. If everything remains constant, you're talking about saving the taxpayers $500,000. So, incrementally to each taxpayer, it might not seem like a lot of money, but when you're talking about saving the taxpayers money, it certainly is something that would, from a public sort of relations perspective, would look good for the board. Because you've made that decision, you've acted on that decision, and that eventually will be, that much less money that we have to pay back, that the taxpayers have to contribute to pay back towards these bonds. But they're the experts, so I put my faith in them, and you know, Carrie has been phenomenal in supporting me since I came into this role, so I trust her implicitly, and Brody and Steve will come very highly recommended as well.
To the chair?
Yes.
When we did it before, Lori and I were the only ones on the board, it went over very well with the community. Because it seems they weren't so happy with the township, you know, everything was going up and more were adding to their taxes, and to see the district being, you know, responsible financially and giving back, I think that was part of us, like Jason had said, it helps us when we go out and ask them for money and have a plan, because we are being very cognizant on what we're asking, and to be able to give them back anything, even if it's just a few dollars, not an increase when your tax bill comes, because that's the first thing you see on social media. My tax bill came. To see that our part of their responsibility is going down, I think is a really good thing.
Well, the way I see it, if it's going to save the taxpayers $500,000, I like that.
I think we should, I mean, if the rates go up, we can always pull out, you know, so I think we should consider moving forward with it, with that caveat that we can always pull out.
Of course.
Madam President, if I may, as Lori was mentioning that, you know, I want to go back to one of the points that Carrie made as she was speaking, in that should that be the case, as Carrie mentioned, we wouldn't necessarily have to act on it in that moment, but there would be the resolution that if and when it becomes favorable, that then we could act on the board's behalf.
So does that mean we'll go for it? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. I say yes. We all say yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is discuss millage renewal and millage restoration.
Thank you, Madam President. So similarly, we are at the point in time where soon enough the board will need to consider our millage renewal and restoration. They function very similarly. What those are the non-homestead taxes that does go out to voters within the South Redford School District, that allows us, as Jeff was mentioning earlier, from Plant Moran, to leverage the full amount of per student foundation allowance that Lansing allocates. And so it does require boards to take action. We have one that is coming due at the end of the calendar year in 2024. So this is planning ahead. And then we have one that's coming due in the calendar year of 2025. My recommendation to the Board of Education is that we would act on those two in conjunction to plan ahead as best we possibly can, and that we would function similarly to how we functioned when we have gone to the voters for restorations and renewals, where we would run it as its own special election in May when students are still in school and families are very much still engaged within the school year, so that we can continue to receive the full allotment of per student funding that we heard from from Mr. Higgins earlier this evening. And so I put that to the board. The time frame would be for May of 2024. And so if that were the direction that the board would want to go, we would want to get things on the ballot with the township, sometime here before the end of the calendar year to plan accordingly, just like Mrs. Hicks had shared. And this would be at no tax increase to the families here within the South Redford School District. But it is something that we are required to do. If the board were to not take action, then at the expiration of these two items, then we would not be able to maximize the full amount of per student foundation allowance that we're eligible for from Lansing.
Yes.
Does this include the 18% for non-homestead?
It does.
Okay.
And then to the chair.
Yes.
And then there is a charge to the district because it would be considered a special election. So the board needs to know that too,
Right.
that there will be a cost.
There would be.
Do we know the approximate amount of, I'm sorry, Shirley, to the chair.
Yes.
Do we know the approximate amount of what it would cost the district to have the special election?
So approximately $35,000. Might be a little bit less, might be a little bit more. Some of that is contingent upon if Redford Union were to run anything on the same ballot, or should the township run anything on the ballot. As of right now, they're not planning to, as far as we're aware. So if they're not, then we would incur the full cost. We did similarly last year when we did the sinking fund renewal, and the price tag was approximately $30,000. However, the district was able to collect over $10 million for what it costs us to run a special election, but then we also don't have to compete in terms of what else is on the ballot, especially when it's not a tax increase, but it would be a cost to the district, like Cheryl mentioned, but I think well worth it, should that be the direction that the board wants to go.
Well, what do we say?
In for a penny, in for a pound. Might as well run both
You're
issues
right.
simultaneously, get our money worth.
You're right. So, does that mean yes?
He'll bring a resolution back to the board in December.
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. All right, very good. Next item on the agenda is discuss Fisher, Jefferson, Vandenberg Elementary Schools, and Pierce Middle School Technology Project Part 1. Okay.
Thank you, Madam President. If I may, I'd like to turn it over to our patient partner that's here this evening, Ms. Kelly Ferguson, to talk with us about this agenda item.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So I'll be back to you again next month for the continuation of this. In the month of November, we went out to bid for our technology package, which is going to be the upgrades to technology as just mentioned at Pierce, Jefferson, Vandenberg, and Fisher. We combined all schools to get the most bang for our buck. In this pricing, in front of you guys today, we are requesting approval, or actually requesting discussion for approval next month for elementary Gym AV. As you guys saw in Adams Elementary School, the new system, that's what this cost is for the 3 remaining elementary schools, as well as some additional Clever Touch panels that you see right here. They're going to be going in to replace the ones that are
malfunctioning or not working, and for the additional ones that we need at Fisher for the new 12 classrooms that we are adding to that school. We are also going to be requesting for the PA clock systems. This past summer, we upgraded all the servers throughout the district, but where we were having new construction happening at Jefferson, Vandenberg, and at Fisher, we did not actually replace the cabling since we didn't want to have to redo the work twice. So this cost right here includes all the new cabling and actual new speakers themselves going into those schools. And finally, we have data cabling, which was all of our low voltage cabling for our internet connections that are going throughout the district as well. Next week, in December, we're going to be coming with the balance of this technology package, which will be for security, so any additional card readers that we have to put in place at the new additions. Those will be coming to you guys, as well as any additional cameras that we need in those spaces as well as the general AV, which will have to do with our new classroom sound systems that are going in the elementary schools and I believe the middle school as well. Everything, we ended up going with the low bidder for the data cabling as well as elementary and PA. I did want to say for elementary and PA, we only had one bidder in each of those categories. That's only because the manufacturers that were specified for that equipment only distributes to one contractor, so we couldn't really go outside. But that will allow us to have equitable products installed across all the elementary schools by continuing that way. And since we're talking about money, this actually came in a little bit under budget for what we were planning for this, so that's a good thing too.
It's all right.
Any questions?
Any questions? Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Next item on the agenda is consider Jefferson, Vandenberg, and Pierce Middle School mechanical equipment, Part 2.
Thank you, Madam President. At the board meeting on November 13th, 2023, the board discussed the Jefferson, Vandenberg, and Pierce Mechanical Equipment Project Part 2. Bids were solicited and received for the work. The company that is recommended for the work required is VUV's Thermalnetics for $1,245,288. During the post-bid review discussions, it was determined that a post-bid addendum was required to eliminate the bipolar ionization from the equipment requirements, thus providing an additional savings to the district. This post-bid addendum changed the lowest qualified bidder. The award to Thermalnetics after the post-bid addendum would be $1,093,544. The 10% contingency, total expenses not to exceed $1,202,898 is requested to cover any unforeseen costs associated with the project. The bid award would be paid out of the 2021 bond. Madam President, a resolution is attached for board consideration.
Is there a board member willing to adopt the resolution?
Madam President, I move the adoption of the following resolution.
Is there support? Support. Mrs. Fletcher?
Yes, support.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? 6 ayes, 0 nays. Resolution adopted. Next item on the agenda is consider Innovation Center millwork project.
Thank you, Madam President. Also at the November 13th, 2023 board meeting, the board discussed the Innovation Center millwork project. Bids were solicited and received for the work. The company that is recommended for this work is Millwork BJ Construction Services Incorporated for $76,625. The 10% contingency, total expenses not to exceed $82,088 is requested to cover any unforeseen costs associated with the project. The bid would also be paid for out of the 2021 bond. Madam President, a resolution is attached for board consideration.
Do I have a board member willing to adopt the following resolution?
Adopt.
Mrs. Hicks, supported by Mrs. Early. All in favor?
Aye.
6 ayes, 3 nays, 0. Resolution adopted. Comments from the audience, topics not related to the agenda.
I got something. Can I go out?
Yes, go ahead.
I'll be brief because I know we've been here for a while. So, Thurston High School Student Council is running their food drive again. We did it last year. We got tons of canned goods, so we're doing it again this year. The student council will be collecting the canned goods next Wednesday, I believe. And then, do you guys know Redford Goodfellows?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're gonna come to the school and then they'll collect all the cans. That's what I got.
That's excellent.
So that's next Wednesday?
Yes, that's when we'll be collecting them.
Okay. What I want you to do is fill out a card, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Desmond.
Next item on the agenda is Plus Delta Plan Board Improvement.
To the chair, can I ask one question? I was looking at upcoming Board of Education meetings, and it says regular/organizational meeting. We have our organizational meeting in January.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
Yeah, it's not done in December.
Typo on my part.
Okay, all right. All right. Mrs.
Ready for this time?
Yes.
Madam President, what work health reports work this evening, possibly?
Well, does anybody have anything that worked well?
Well, it's the first meeting I've been to in a long time for me. It all worked well.
And we're so glad you are here, Lord. You really are.
What processes may help the board's work in the future? Opportunities for improvement, Delta?
Do we have any deltas? Well, if there's nothing that comes before this board, I adjourn this meeting at 8:18.